Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting a few seconds while all of the attendees enter the Zoom room. So we'll give it a few more seconds. Welcome, everyone. This is the second webinar in a series on Indigenous rights in the Asia Pacific. The focus of this webinar series is to review the status of Indigenous rights struggles in various regions of the Asia Pacific. The initial webinar was held last December 2024 and focused on the region of Oceania, which was Australia, New Zealand, and West Papua. Today's webinar is focused on South Asia. The purpose of this series is to highlight and promote awareness among the international audience of Indigenous rights issues within the Asia Pacific. My name is Jonathan Liljeblad. I'm Associate Professor at the Australia National University School of Law. I am an Indigenous person. I'm a member of the Pa'o Indigenous peoples that are located in the Shan Hills of Eastern Myanmar, and I have organized this webinar series. This entire series is a product of two interest groups through the American Society of International Law, specifically the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Interest Group, of which I am the co-chair, and the Asia Pacific Interest Group. Today's webinar is being hosted at the campus of the Australian National University. It is joined with the support and sponsorship of the American Society of International Law, LAWASIA, which is the law association for the Asia Pacific, and the Harvard University Law School Human Rights Program. The title of tonight's webinar is Indigenous Rights Struggles in South Asia, with a particular focus on the countries of Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. We are joined tonight by three Indigenous women lawyers who are speaking from their personal experiences regarding Indigenous rights issues in their respective countries. I want to begin the webinar with a practice called Acknowledgement of Country. Because we are hosted at Australia National University, it is a practice in Australia to provide acknowledgement of country, which goes like this. We acknowledge that we are meeting through the Australia National University on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. In addition, we extend our acknowledgement and respects to all Indigenous peoples throughout the world, which we hope to serve through this webinar series. Ground rules for tonight's webinar is that it extends for 60 minutes. Each speaker has 12 minutes for their presentation. I will be informing each speaker when they have 2 minutes remaining. At the end of all three presentations, we then turn to question and answer, and the audience can provide their questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom page. So please go ahead and collect your questions, type them into the Q&A session, and then I, as the moderator, will go ahead and relay the questions to the speakers individually. We will begin tonight with a focus on Bangladesh, and the initial speaker is Muktasri. Let me just turn to this. Muktasri Chakma Sathi. She is a member of the Chakma peoples of the Chittagong Hills in Bangladesh. She is a founder of Supporting People and Rebuilding Communities, or SPARC. She is also a core group member of Sangat, a member of the Action Aid Bangladesh, and also works with Collaboration for Impact in Australia. She has focused her work on eliminating discrimination against Indigenous peoples and women in the Chittagong Hills. So Muktasri, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And also I want to thank the organizers who organized this second webinar of the series. It's to start, I first want to acknowledge that the Indigenous elders, past and present, not only in Australia, but also around the world, who hasn't been still recognized. And that would be a significant part of my presentation today when I am talking about Bangladesh and the situation of Indigenous communities in Bangladesh. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can have a look at the map. And yeah, Jonathan, can I have a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Yeah,
Yes, we can see it.
and it's all
Yes, it's
going
fully,
to the screen.
yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just starting from the India-Pakistan partition that happened, and we became decolonized from the British colonization. And that's when the India, Pakistan, and the three Bangladesh has been referred as the subcontinent. That happened in mid-40s. After mid-40s, the Pakistan area in this side and this one used to called East Pakistan, and they were referred as the same country while India was the another country. In 1971, the Bangladesh got liberated from Pakistan. So the East Pakistan became the newly liberated country. And this is the map of Bangladesh. I'm just showing it to show you that where the indigenous peoples lives in Bangladesh. So as you see, this part of the map is called Chittagong Hill Tracts. That's the most dense indigenous community population are there. But also we can see in the Sylhet region, there are also indigenous people, and also somewhat in the coastal area and this part of the northern region. Um, I'm when the point to show you about the map is that in the Chittagong Hill Tracts region, we used to be 97.5% of the total population back in 1940s in the British area. But then that ratio decreased to around 51% in 2014. And this decrease in the population mainly happened due to the state supported Bengali settler going to the Chittagong Hill Tracts area. I'm just going to stop sharing here. I'm also not seeing where the people are, so that is making me a little bit unstable. So that's what it happened in Bangladesh, where the ethnic population were going to be settled in the Chittagong Hill Tracts area. And this immigration or the massive wave of transmigration of the Bengali people that happened from 1979 to 1985 was a part of the counter-insurgency strategy of the states against the Chittagong Hill Tracts indigenous peoples. And while we are talking about the Chittagong Hill Tracts people, and I earlier talked about the recognition of the indigenous people, and I also paid my respect to the elders. I think the most vital point that bothers me as a person from the law background and also a person from the indigenous peoples community, that I'm not being recognized with my own identity. The Bangladesh government has been denied always the recognition of indigenous peoples in Bangladesh. They will label us as small anthropological group, tribe, ethnic, or in the other names, but they always denied to refer us as the indigenous peoples. Interestingly, when the last government was thrown out in August last year, the interim government is now running Bangladesh. And maybe many of you know that the chief advisor of government of Bangladesh, of the interim government, is now Dr. Muhammad Yunus, who is Nobel laureate. Interestingly, in his first speech to the nation, we saw that he recognized or referred the indigenous peoples of Bangladesh as indigenous people. So that was a huge moment for Bangladeshi indigenous people when we saw that a person who is in the top in the power, who is in the highmost position in the power, is calling us with the name that we prefer, not with the name that we find disrespectful. But then after since August to this time, we see that his stance also got changed, and he now changed his position and not referring the indigenous people as indigenous. Covering the Bangladesh indigenous people situation in 10-12 minutes, it's very difficult. I just wanted to tell you, share the struggle, the main struggle that the indigenous peoples are facing, and I hope to answer your question. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I hope I was in time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you were in plenty of time. You were actually 4 minutes early. So but we can return to the questions with the topic of Bangladesh at the end of the hour. So thank you for that presentation. Next, we're turning attention to India, specifically, I think, Nagaland. And for that, the speaker is Guangchun. The formal name is Guangchunlu Gangmei. She is a Naga indigenous woman. Nagaland is in the northeast of India. Her work focuses on self-determination of indigenous peoples, land rights, gender justice, and human rights advocacy. She is a program lead of a human rights campaign and policy advocacy group for the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, which is where she's joining us from at this point in time. And she has also been a researcher and a coordinator with the national campaign on Dalit rights, and as well as a coalition of human rights activists for the rights of Dalits and Adivasi in India, and also with respect to women in governance. I now turn the floor over to Guangchun. And Guangchun, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm just going to pull up a slide. Okay, thanks a lot. But to establish the fact that I'm not a lawyer, but but thanks for the introduction, Jonathan. My presentation will focus a lot on India, a bit of historical perspective, because that's where you will be able to understand the context where the indigenous peoples are at the moment in India. So my presentation would be covering broadly India and not specifically to Nagaland. So just to begin with, in Asia, the recognition of indigenous people, like my previous colleague has spoken, that it's non-existent except for a few countries. And even after the recognition of UN DRIP and other international commitments, the situation of indigenous peoples are still very challenging. In India, when the UN DRIP was adopted, India voted for favor of UN DRIP, but with the understanding that after independence, all Indians are considered indigenous. Therefore, the concept of indigenous peoples and the UN DRIP itself is not applicable to India. So a lot of these developments impact a lot on the indigenous people in India. Although the indigenous people are not recognized officially as indigenous peoples, the tribal people in India have been positioning themselves as indigenous. And it has now become a common consciousness with these people. And the tribals themselves have adopted this consciousness, and they have been and they have been and they have adopted themselves to mean the dispossessed, deprived people in the region. And also, there are several organizations that are articulating the fact that we are indigenous people, which consist of like national level configurations as well as a regional level. The result is that the identity of tribal as indigenous people have become a marked reality today, notwithstanding the very conceptual and empirical arguments brought to bear against them. It is in this context that it is important to understand the concept of how the tribal people were conceptualized in India, because through this understanding and through the historical conceptualization of indigenous people, the governance, the policies, and provisions of in the constitutions and the laws that have been enacted thereafter are heavily impacted by how indigenous people are understood in India. So the concept of the tribe in India is originated with the rise of European colonialism. You will see in the slide that there are several provisions that were enacted during the colonial period. And particularly the Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation Act and the Scheduled Areas Act. The 1919 conceptions, such as the backward tracts and administered areas, were articulated by academicians such as Gurrier and Elwin, which were locked in fierce debate in the tribal questions in the 1940s and 60s. And tribals are perceived as backward Hindus or special communities to be isolated, and later as Kshatriya caste, respectively. Well-known academics in tribal studies, Roy and Bose, identified tribes more in terms of cultural markers and thereby locking tribe a cultural historical category. Beatty, for example, conceptualized as tribe in transition. And there is this Nehruvian concept developed when he was articulating the Panchil of a tribal development, which celebrating the concept of own genius on right to land and forest, endogenous development with minimal outside interference and no administration and development in consonance with tribal social and cultural institutions. It was only during the all of these notions were holding influence until the writings of Virginius Kaka, as some of you might know, he tribal himself, which has identified tribes not only a social cultural entity existing in time and space, but a cultural political identity perceived vertically and political historical entity located horizontally in time and space, which means that the tribe is a socio-cultural entity. It is also a political unit, a nation, and by itself. It is neither a caste nor a peasant group, and neither it is stratified grouping, which in due course of time will lose sense of nationhood in the sea of greater traditions. But in India, the tribe, the understanding of tribe, the scheduled tribe still remains only a political administrative category, and that there is no definition of the tribes in the understanding of the Indian Constitution. The tribal movements in India have been predominantly centered around demand for autonomy. These have stemmed from the fear and anxiety of the loss of their identity, land, and other resources. Such anxiety could be dated to the period of transfer of power from British to the Indians. The national and regional leadership was aware of the restlessness among the tribes. And as a result, during the Constituent Assembly debate, a lot of these provisions of the Constitution were kept to address some of this restlessness. The law aimed at Indigenous people have numerous shortcomings, and their implementation is far from satisfactory. There are special constitutional provisions as it is given in the slide, like the provisions of Article 371A for Nagaland, for example, 371G for Mizoram. It provides exclusive power to the state assembly on matters concerning religious, social practices, customary law, and procedure of the concerned communities, administrative, civil, and criminal justice in areas covered by customary law, ownership and transfer of land and its resources. So it covers a wide variety of rights for the Indigenous people in Nagaland and Mizoram. The Article 244 provide for 6 scheduled areas in some of the northeastern states that provides for creation of autonomous district and regional councils with a number of legislative, executive, and judicial powers of the number of subjects. That is for the Indigenous peoples' territories in Northeast India. In the central part of region, which covers from Rajasthan to the West Bengal area, it is a lot of the constitutional provisions are recognized under Article 244, where Indigenous people inhabited areas are demarcated as scheduled areas by the President of India, and this is covered in 10 states of the Central Belt. So the governors of these states are provided extensive powers to prevent or modify any law enactment by Parliament or the state legislative assembly in the scheduled area. But the governors did not exercise these powers. It is a very great powers assigned to the governors to enact and implement this law, but a lot of this is not implemented. In 1996, provision for Panchayat extension, commonly known as the PESA Act, was introduced, which gives Gram Sabha, the village, to have this, to empower and manage their affairs. But despite the passage of this, it's been a long time, but implementation is very tiny, and the rules are only implemented, notified only for 6 out of 10 states. There are also several agreements and accords signed with the government of India with Indigenous communities like the Naga people, but this has been a long negotiation, and it's almost stuck in a limbo. There are agreements and understandings signed from time to time, but government of India doesn't really have the political will to address some of this self-determination aspiration of the Indigenous peoples in Nagaland as well. The reason why this non-implementation of this provision also is not working is also due to the fact that when these were adopted, also largely from what is left by the colonial power. And what is left by the colonial power is not in harmony with a lot of the indigenous ways of life. So what the European colonizers left behind are governing systems, processes, and norms that were subsequently adopted by the national elites and used to perpetrate the marginalization of the tribals in India. These processes are also identified as internal colonialism by the Indigenous people, and the state governments today have largely continued the marginalization, oppression, exclusion, and Indigenous people practice of European colonial powers, including colonial practices and systems over lands, creating internal boundaries and eroding traditional governance and their territories. Let me know if I have over.
You have time. You have another, yeah,
Okay.
you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. The colonial state policies and the development aggression are continuously undermining Indigenous people's sovereignty and self-determination, eroding traditional self-governance, and further severing Indigenous people's connections with their territories. Indigenous political institutions are increasingly confronted by entities, also as the corporations and international financial institutions, promoting development projects that intake extraction and appropriation of indigenous land and resources, often under heavy militarization. Likewise, the changing patterns of land tenure, including selling of lands to outsiders, the emergence of new types of leaders are not accountable to indigenous communities, and the influx of non-indigenous migrants in the region. Broadly speaking, indigenous people are forced to live under governments that are not their own, in which can hardly participate and on which they have no influence. The loss of self-governance in indigenous communities accelerates social disintegration, alienates community from their roots. It robs them of their capacity to collectively identify and address their problems and needs, envision a better future. So the heart of the indigenous struggle now is the recovery of their self-determination, because this underpins the enjoyment of the rights of the context, the rights enshrined in the UN DRIP as well. So the urgent need now, as I see it, is the recovery and revival of self-governance system in order to defend our autonomy and assert our right to self-determination, to strengthen democracy, expansion of civic spaces, and for transformation of institutional structure to accommodate our right to self-determination. So the political mobilization is essential to open up political space for governance reforms, to reclaim our self-determination. And there is a need for concrete critical examination, for informed engagement, for it to be constructive, and to pave the path forward to decolonization and self-determination, where we are able to reclaim indigenous visions, worldview, and the value systems. And also to how to sustain this for enough changes to be made and take effective sufficiently to turn the tide. I end here, Jonathan, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was very informative. We are now turning to Nepal. So the speaker for Nepal is Indira Kumari Shrish. She is a member of the Maga Indigenous community in Nepal. She is a legal professional and a founder and chair of INWOLAG, which is the acronym for Indigenous Women Legal Awareness Group, INWOLAG, which is based in Kathmandu. She has 30 years of experience in law, performing advocacy, lobbying, research, training, as well as providing legal aid services, all of it focused primarily on environmental justice and then the rights of Indigenous women. I will now turn the floor over to Indira. Because of some of the internet issues, I will be sharing Indira's PowerPoint from my side, and Indira will tell me when to advance the PowerPoint. So Indira, feel free to go ahead and begin, and I will share your PowerPoint to the audience.
Thank you, Jurley. Namaste from Nepal. Thank you, this golden opportunity for sharing my knowledge in the world. Yeah, my topics is indigenous rights and struggles in Nepal. We are struggling since very historically, and right now too, we are struggling from the colonial and Hinduism in Nepal to the indigenous community. Please, next slide, please. It is the picture from my village, Durpatan Hunting Reserve. That's the, yeah. Nepal is a mountain country with the 61 indigenous peoples out of 125 castes, having 31 million populations with 51 female and 36% indigenous peoples by government, but we indigenous peoples claim 50% of total population in Nepal. But now we are colonial, practical, and Hindu-dominant law, society, and caste-based system is still prevalent. Elevation from 67 meters to a high 8,848 plus meter above the sea level with the diverse ecosystem in Nepal, tropical to alpine ecosystem in 8 Himalayan more than 8,000 meters. Please, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. We have protected area of Nepal that's, please, previous slide.
Oh, back, there we go. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. We have protected areas who are the indigenous peoples living in struggling in Nepal. In Nepal, around 23.39 of the country of total lands managed by protected areas. And please, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. And also map of Nepal with distribution from the is Nepal around 34 of the country forests are managed by the more than 22 community forest user group. We have community forest group, but not engage our indigenous community, only the local community they are accessing in the whole forest area. But we are struggling now that our forest and land and territories. Please, next slide. Yeah. And we have also more national park and conservation area, about 23.39 areas are under protected area system. 12 national park and 13 buffer zone. One is wildlife reserve and one hunting reserve. And that is the hunting reserve area, my village site, and government proposed a new buffer zone area. Then we are struggling now to that buffer zone area. This protected area is a big land and forest. We are serving our way of life, but government is taking that and proposing that the new buffer zone and other 6 conservation areas are in Nepal. Please, next slide. Next, yeah, it is the Chiton National Park, but now taking government national park and buffer zone name of the development and conservation area. There are so many indigenous communities, lands, but now it is going to name of Chiton National Park and Buffer Zone. Then displace more around the indigenous Tharu community is going displaced in their own land. Please, next slide. Yeah. They shows the Tharu's indigenous community. For instance, the national park and Wildlife Conservation Act of 1973 is still prevalent in Nepal. That is the criminalized traditional practice like singing, gathering plants, and hunting, which are the integral of indigenous culture and the livelihoods. Indigenous people found collective resources of practicing their traditional occupation within protected areas are often met with punishment, including harassment, abuse, and illegal detention. It is the struggling and scenario in Nepal. Please, next slide. And also we have our government planning to the hydropower in Nepal. It is the main economic source of Nepal for the government. And river system, snowfit and rainfit, 6,000 rivers. We have rich country from the river side. Theoretically, potential power is 83 megawatt, economically feasible 43 megawatt. Electricity power produced till date 28,000 megawatt. Nepal plans to generate by 2035 30,000 megawatt. The largest investor for hydropower in Nepal. Nepal Electricity Agency, legal body, and other development sector, investing sector are the World Bank, Asian Development, EIB, JICA, and the non-resident Nepalese too. But it's what impact they don't know, only they are the rising and interest the economic perspective of their own agency, not for our community. Please, next slide. Yeah, like it is just a sample of our Tanaho hydropower project. Its area, it's residing in specific indigenous Magar community, but their land is grazing and agriculture land. But Tanaho hydropower project occupied this community's land. So we are advising to since 2016 till date. It is the big struggle and the community with the development bank and our government. It is complaint and mechanism for their land for land. Please list next slide, please. Yeah, that ADB and JICA and also EIB and Nepal government investing this area, but for economic perspective for the country, but we are facing and going to displacement is that picture shows it is trying to going other place for their life in future. It is the more struggling phase we are facing now, not a picture only. Next slide, please. Yeah, internal hydropower is just only one study I saw during the time period. Yes, supporting the Tano hydropower and effective community since 2016 as advisor from the INOLAC, my team, and affected community majority belongs to indigenous community. 547 households being affected by the project. The project will destroy 9 cremation sites, 6 rest places, 7 bridges, and 11 foot trails. The will also affect 3,164 hectares of residential and 69,084 productive land. The community will also lose their language, culture, practices, indigenous knowledge being displaced from their native land. It is the just only scenario, but around the country, hydropower and development sector going to impact it. Please next slide. Yeah, it is we are support to the complaint. The community is still in with the ADB to disturb dispute resolution. The community demand is land for land instead of monetary compensation. Money is just only today, but land is our sustainable livelihood and sustainable identity. the complaint of the community is still with ADB for dispute resolution. The community demand land for land instead of money. Please, next slide.
We have 2 minutes remaining.
Yeah. Please. Yeah, it is a major incident with indigenous people in Nepal, and estimation puts the 65% in total land and forest of ancestral land, and indigenous people are occupied by the protected area like national park and wildlife conservation. And our community going to in national park, Chitao National Park, 20,000 Tharu indigenous peoples in this place. In Bardea National Park, and 274 Tharus, and the other village, 250 family. It is, and also Sivapuri Nagarjung near our Kathmandu village, and 107 household Tamang indigenous located in, and 20,000 will displace soon. It is the scenario in Nepal. And it is, we have not recognized by the government our culture, our language, our traditional life, land, and natural resources in the constitution. But our government signed every international treaties, ILO Convention 169, and also UNDRIP and CBD show on the international treaties, but not domesticated still. So it is the gap between international treaties and indigenous practice and our constitution to domestic law. It is the challenging for us. We demand and we plead to the advocate or for the protect our rights and our life. If I have time, please next slide. If not, it's a low level. It is the traits and indigenous knowledge and system. Most people practices postural and substance economy, 75% economy from agriculture and forest-based economy, loss of economy and cultural practices, and lost indigenous people's customary institution of practices, and also degradation of local ecosystem and risk of natural hazard, and such as uncontrolled wildfiring and low-level adapting of higher and modern technology advance in climate science, which is likely false data and information, complexity of government system and governing system, transparency, participation, access to accountability, and high level of uncertainty for getting direct benefit, colonization into the scared sides of culture. That's. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That was a very, very informative presentation and very comprehensive. I am just stopping share on the PowerPoint, so we're returning to the main screen for everyone, for all the speakers. So I ask the speakers to turn on your cameras, and we will turn to question and answer. There was one question. So I just want to turn back to Mutasri and Bangladesh, and to provide you a response to address one of the points that was raised with respect to India and Nepal, which was what are the most urgent rights issues right now. So in terms of the rights that are considered priorities for indigenous activism, with India and with Nepal, we identified through the presentations what the major concerns are, but I wanted to allow you an opportunity to identify what you think, in your own personal estimate, what are the urgent or priority rights issues for Indigenous peoples in Bangladesh? So Mukhtasari, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jonathan. The priority issue for the Indigenous people, again, I think it lies with the recognition of the Indigenous people as Indigenous people. I can see in the question and answer as well, there are a few comments that the Indigenous peoples are not, connected, not relevant for India, Nepal, or whatever country. I think changing that mindset, not only from within us, but also legally is very much needed. Why it's needed? Because when we are referred, we are recognized as Indigenous people with our own identity. We also become subject to all the rights that are being recognized by the United Nations Declaration Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that trickle down to the state, and a state needs to reform the law to respect Indigenous people's right, which will cover the resources, recognition, violence against women, children, criminalizing the whole Indigenous communities and everything. So I think that will be my first priority to talk about and to demand for that.
Thank you for that answer. And that leads to the same question, because I think Raul, I see that the question, it was specific to India, but I think all of the speakers should probably have an opportunity to also address that same question about why should we use the term indigenous to refer to these communities in India and Nepal? So Guangchun, did you want to respond to this? Like why should we use the term indigenous?
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult topic, and in my presentation, I also have referred to this as it's a ongoing, I mean, the conception of tribes as indigenous people is in the articulation, it is still a problematic concept, both in the empirical and conceptual nature. That's what I have said that as well in an articulation of various academics as well. But the important thing is that sometimes when we are only looking at this definition of why, it sometimes obscure the real struggle of indigenous people. But what we need to recognize now, even if that is the stance of the government of India, that everyone is indigenous, the reality have emerged that these tribal people that the government of India recognize as the scheduled tribes have positioning themselves as the indigenous people. And there's this rising common consciousness of them being an indigenous people, looking at aligning them with the provisions under the UN DRIP, etc., where indigenous peoples are defined not only as a settler colonial understanding, but also to mean dispossession deprived people of the region, where during the whole colonial process and after the decolonization process itself, where the elite majority are continuing the whole colonial concept, adoption of the different provisions that were adopted during the colonial period is being transferred to the new laws and policies. And so that kinds of like have a continuity of this dispossession, of the discriminalization, discrimination of indigenous people. And hence the root cause of the violence that we are seeing now, as my colleagues also have presented in different areas, dispossession from the territorial areas, dispossession of their cultures, practices, traditional way of life, governance institutions, customary justice systems, etc., are also due to the fact that when after the decolonization process and the newly independent states and the nation building, the Indigenous peoples were not consulted well enough. Of course, there's a Constituent Assembly debates happen in India, where all of these different groups were also brought over, and some of their demands were met, and hence there are some provisions in the Constitution of India from the constitutional debates that happened. But the fact remains that these are also not much in congruence and in harmony with how the indigenous system works, or how the worldview of indigenous peoples function. So that continues the root cause of violence until now. Be development projects, infrastructural development, and now the emerging transition into green energy as well, that's impacting. It's not changed at all. So I think the most important thing now to consider is that is to recognize the priorities and the rights of the indigenous peoples in their territories, as and how they want it to be recognized under the definition under the definition or the provisions under different international declaration or commitments that the different governments have committed to. So yeah, I will end with that. But also the interesting thing that is happening in India is that increasingly, not that we are legally recognized as indigenous people, increasingly the government of India is also using the term such as indigenous populations and in some of the official notifications. I will give you an example of one of this high-level committee that was formed to investigate social, economic, cultural, and linguistic issues in the indigenous populations in the state of Tripura, for example. Or during the justification of the Citizen Amendment Bill of 2019, this was also recognized. And for example, also in the state of Jharkhand, where tribal people are majority, they have declared the International Day of the World's Indigenous People of the 9th August as a state holiday. And the tribal ministries, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, for example, issue statements on the 9th August as or declare is as Tribal People's Day, for example, the 9th August, International Day of the World Indigenous People. So even though there is no recognition as such, there are increasing use of this. It's confusing. But it's things are happening in that sense. It's also because of how the indigenous peoples have been putting forth their demands and using this consciousness as indigenous people, as dispossessed people from the pre-colonial to the colonial to the decolonial stages. So Jonathan, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and then let us get Indira's response. So Indira, like, why, in your opinion, why should we use the term indigenous in discussions about Nepal?
Yeah, it is. We have the struggling to our identity, for our identity, to address the constitution, not only international standard, but we have the right to domesticate in our policies. So, but our politician and also our government doesn't recognize our voices. So, but we have our land, territory, and natural resources, but government already have the capture our rights. So we are going to the displace, and how we can go our mainstream. It is the main problem our scenario in Nepal. So we have to unite to address our identity to our constitution. It is the main demand our struggling, and so we have to move and demand our government, but government are not heard our voice, and it is the problem, our scenario.
Thank you. I want to turn to another question from the Q&A. And this question is from Bupati Gurung, and it's about potential solutions or potential strategies. So we've talked about rights, Indigenous rights, particularly in the form of legal rights. But the question here talks about the idea of representation, and if it is helpful to have formulas for representation, like quota systems, proportional representation. And so I guess for all of you, the question is, what are effective solutions to improve Indigenous representation? Or what are, in your opinion, what are the most critical strategies for improving protection of Indigenous rights? Maybe I'll change the order a little bit. And so I'll go first with India, so Guangchun, and then we'll go to Bangladesh and then back to Nepal. So Guangchun, did you want to try and answer that first?
Okay, I'll give it a try. Representation is important, for sure. In the Indian Constitution, we do have provisions for representation in the form of reservations in educational institutions, in the state legislative assembly, in the Lok Sabha, etc., and also in job posting. But the thing is, we are still operating under the state system, which doesn't recognize a lot of the Indigenous worldview and what Indigenous peoples want. So representation in itself is not enough. It is important, but it is not enough. But what I see, and because I work with Asia Indigenous Peoples PAC, and we are also trying to re-envision why this, I mean, even if there are laws and policies available, if there are certain recognition of Indigenous people's rights, for example, in the Philippines or Nepal or Cambodia, etc., even though there are semblance of representation, there are semblance of recognition, it has not been enough. The violence has not stopped. The incursions on Indigenous people's land have not stopped. We are losing our lands, territories, and resources, which means we are losing our rights because our rights are tied and our identity are tied to our land. So so I think the most important thing is to support the movement of self-determination that in different countries, many Indigenous people organizations are coming together. There are a lot of national formations as well, articulating their right to self-determination, the need for recognition, the struggle for recognition, and also revitalizing some of their and rebuilding their communities, their institutions, their ways of life, their worldviews, etc. So I think it is important to support this movement if there are people who are also in the audience who are able to influence or who are able to support the Indigenous peoples in different countries. We would like to, call on them to keep supporting this initiative, be it with your government, be it with dialogue with different institutions. It could be private sectors, it could be companies, etc., and wherever possible. So I'll end it at Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then Muktasri, did you want to provide a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think the representation is very much needed, particularly when we are coming from a history-long systematic oppression and discrimination. So it's obviously needed. But at the same time, I also think that whether the representation is actually becoming a meaningful representation, or we are just having a person like a signboard that we have someone from the Indigenous peoples, we have someone from the women, but then their voice is not being recognized. Being engaged in many organizations, I have seen so many times, and sorry to say, I'm pissed that I have been involved in so many organizations just to tick the box that we have someone from Indigenous peoples. So that is my concern. Also, I also think that there should be a transparency and a process how we, the indigenous people, select our leader to represent us in a community, organization, forum, whatever. Because in the indigenous community as well, the transparency sometimes get missing. It's always, it feels like whoever gets some sort of access, opportunity, information, they are the one who always get picked up to represent. And maybe there is a gap with what the grassroots indigenous peoples wants, who they want to see to represent them, and who are actually representing the indigenous people in the bigger forum. I will leave it there. Yeah.
Good points all around, and thank you for that. And Indira, I'm going to give you the last word since we're running out of time, but go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan Ji. Yeah, it's my opinion. Representation and quota is not a initiate for us indigenous people because we have lost lots of our land and natural resources and our identity. So we have our culture, our identity, and our practice within our community, but we have right to self-determination and back our land and natural resources. We have the skill and practice and rights to our self-governance. We have to the practice in our protect our rights. So only the representation and quota system is the paper, not only practice. It is just only paper, not practice. It is not our justice for indigenous people. We need a right to self-determination. We need back our land, natural resources, so we can practice and governance, good governance within our community. It should be address our constitution. So no need to representation, no need to quota. We have right to self-determination, and we have our customary institution, our self-governance system. So we need the address in constitution, so we can everything ourselves, our protection, our land and natural resources and our rights. It's my opinion. Thank you, Jonathan Ji. It's my final version to flee you and our around the peoples and also my government too. Thank you.
Thank you, Indira. I just unmuted myself, so there we go. And thanks to all the speakers for their excellent insights and comments today. We are actually over time, so we were scheduled for 60 minutes and we're well past that now. So I think we'll go ahead and have to finish at this point in time. For anyone in the audience who continues to have questions, I'm more than happy to relay them to the speakers via email. You're welcome to try and email me. Let me just, I'll put my email address in the chat space. I'll give you my Gmail, which seems to be more accessible for most people in the international community. And then likewise, Muktasri, Indira, or Guangchun, if you're comfortable, feel free to share your email addresses that you'll welcome questions from the audience. And emails that you prefer. You don't have to, so it's your choice. And that way we can respond to questions that we were not able to address during the time tonight. On a final comment, this series will continue. We have scheduled subsequent webinars covering areas regarding East Asia and Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and then also the Pacific as well. We will take them in turn, hopefully on a quarterly basis, dependent entirely upon the availability of speakers. We do aim to feature Indigenous speakers, so all of the speakers that we have in our webinar series are Indigenous representatives, Indigenous lawyers, Indigenous activists, all of them drawing upon their own personal experiences and giving to you, the audience, their own voice. I want to also thank the assistants, the staff that never get public attention, who helped to organize this event. In particular, for today, it was Chami Samarskara with the Australian National University marketing team. We are severely understaffed at ANU at the moment, and so Chami dedicated time that she did not have to make sure that this webinar ran on time and was recorded for posterity. I also want to thank Australian National University itself for hosting this webinar series. Once again, I want to thank the support of the American Society of International Law, LAWASIA, the Association, Legal Association for the Asia Pacific, and also the Harvard University Law School Human Rights Program. We enjoy the support of all of our sponsors, and we make full use of their resources in trying to support all of our Indigenous speakers. So I want to thank the audience for attending tonight. The recording will be uploaded to the YouTube channel for the American Society of International Law. I'm not sure how long that will take. Usually it's about 1 month. But then if you ever want to see the recording, you can search for it on YouTube. So thanks to the audience, and thanks particularly to our 3 speakers. So once again, Guang Chun, Muktasri, and Indira. Very grateful for your time, very grateful for your thoughts. And admittedly, it was a very short webinar, 60 minutes, but hopefully this provided a venue for you to go ahead and express your personal perspectives. And then most importantly, allowed you to reach out to a larger audience. So thank you, and good night to everyone.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much.